You know, when all the trials were shut down across the nation and we here at Court TV had to change a little bit what we were doing, this show was launched. This 8 o'clock show was launched. And from the beginning, we've been covering the biggest stories across the nation. One of those stories that we've been covering from the beginning is the case of Breonna Taylor. And this is a case that it took a while because there were other stories that people were talking about. We were talking about it from the beginning. But there are other stories that people were talking about, but now everyone knows her name because they've said her name. And I think this story has touched so many because of the facts, right? Breonna Taylor is home in her apartment, gets shot and killed. Why? It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense. She should be alive. All of that, 100% true. Now the story has pivoted and has pivoted greatly from, okay, what happened and why did it happen? We got an answer from the Attorney General, the one who's in charge of prosecuting the case, as to why there are no criminal charges related to the death of Breonna Taylor. And there was a grand jury proceeding involving this case and this investigation. But now the story has pivoted and it's about that grand jury and what happened in that grand jury. And was the fix in, is kind of the drumbeat that you're starting to hear, that people are now attacking the Attorney General of Kentucky and wanting more answers and ultimately wanting criminal charges in this case. Now, there are criminal charges against one person that night, Brett Hankison. And his case was in court again today. But his charges pretty much unrelated to Breonna Taylor. He fired his weapon into a neighbor's apartment, and it was wanton, and it was reckless, according to the prosecutor. And we'll continue to follow that case as well. But there's a lot still going on tonight with that grand jury, because we have grand jurors, and I've never, ever seen this happen, grand jurors who are coming forward through representatives trying to be heard, asking questions, making statements. And we're going to continue to follow it. It's a big part of this story, and it's a big part of what's happening in our nation. Joining me right now, Court TV crime and justice reporter Julie Janae and Court TV special contributor Ashley Banfield. Great to have you both here. Julie Janae, let's talk about this second grand juror now is wanting to come forward. There's a call for grand jury transcripts to be released. The audio has already been released from the testimony and the evidence. But now folks want the transcripts, and we've got a second grand juror that wants to come forward here.
Vinny, these two grand jurors are still nameless. They're faceless. We don't know much about who they are other than that they sat on this panel for the Breonna Taylor investigation. But this second juror now, according to a nonprofit executive director, Christopher 2X, there in Louisville, he says he was contacted by a grand juror who wanted help coming forward, wanted help sharing their story. And we know that first juror, they came forward, and that was through an attorney that actually filed a motion on their behalf requesting that those audio recordings get released. That happened last Friday, and one of the things that attorney that you see there, Kevin Glogauer, he said that I hope that this will encourage other grand jurors to be brave and to come forward, and that is what seems to be happening. Take a listen.
I got a call, and it's in connection with a second grand juror now, and as factually as I can say it. So it's obvious that not only the original grand juror who filed is feeling something, now we've got another one. And who knows, depending on what Judge O'Connell does, to give us understanding on the next steps, how many more want to feel freely to say, here's my version of what happened with the Breonna Taylor evidence that we was presented with in the grand jury looking into the shooting.
Vinny, one reason that these grand jurors may still not be talking themselves is that the judge has not made it clear on the record whether or not they will be able to come forward and avoid any repercussions from the court.
Yeah, I mean, this is unprecedented. This doesn't happen. We don't hear testimony from the grand jury. We've heard it. Generally, we don't hear from grand jurors at all, and it looks like we may, depending upon what happens here. Ashley, the other part of this story, like we say, everyone knows her now, and now people know the Attorney General of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron is his name, and all of a sudden now everyone seems to know who he is, and he actually came up on the show, Saturday Night Live, which used to be a comedy show, but it came up this weekend, Ashley. His name.
Yeah, I mean, it was the season premiere, and Megan Thee Stallion was the musical guest and performed an awesome song, a very popular song. And then in the middle of that song, decided to make a political statement about Daniel Cameron. Now, the whole song did make a reference to protect Black women all the way through it. But then there was a very pointed reference, as you could see images of gunshots that had blood coming out of them in the backdrop behind her. There was a pointed reference made about Daniel Cameron. And it's not going to be Megan Thee Stallion's voice that you're about to hear. She actually first had another voice talking about the plight of Black women in America, but then she went on to use the voice of another person, Tamika Mallory, who's a very well-known activist, supports Black Lives Matter, and had said some slightly incendiary things about Daniel Cameron, and this was the voice that she decided to play in the middle of her song with the words behind her. So we're going to show it to you so you can see it in its context.
Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet?
Daniel Cameron is no different than the sellout Negroes that sold our people into slavery by statute.
We need to protect our Black women and love our Black women. Because at the end of the day, we need our Black women.
So pretty powerful statement there, coming right on the heels of the words of, Malcolm X, hearing Tamika Mallory's comment there about Daniel Cameron. He hasn't specifically answered to that, but he has had some things to say on social media about what happened in that performance this weekend. But I just wanted to mention real quickly, Vinny, that you're right about grand jury proceedings being so secretive, and it's so unusual for us to hear about this, but we did hear about it in Michael Brown's case. Those grand jury proceedings, again, such a heated environment, so politically charged and so racially charged that in those proceedings, we were able to actually get some insight. And perhaps that's what Daniel Cameron's proceedings will end up being like as well, just a little bit more transparency because of the climate, because of the Megan Thee Stallions of the world who are now, thrusting this out into pop culture. I'm very worried personally about the jury pool. When this kind of thing happens and it starts, imbuing everybody's sort of class, their knowledge about the case through the music. That's really hard. When you start to pick jurors, they immediately think that Daniel Cameron's a criminal and the guy he's prosecuting maybe too.
Let's talk about the response, Julia, of Daniel Cameron. I mean, he's been pretty busy on social media firing back here.
He has. He's also been talking to the media. He's had several sit-downs since he made that announcement about the indictment. But he also put out a tweet this morning, less than 48 hours after that Saturday Night Live performance. Here's an excerpt from it. He said there were a lot of people, specifically a lot of celebrities, that either misrepresented facts because it was to their advantage or they didn't know all of the information. And he says they wanted to cherry pick those facts. He says he doesn't have the luxury of that as Attorney General. And he highlights this part. My responsibility is to the truth and the facts. So that is what he has been emphasizing throughout this.
Yeah, Ashley, what's interesting, I've evaluated this case based upon what we heard from the grand jury and everything else. And I'd like to see the folks who are so angry with the Attorney General to lay out how you're going to prove a criminal homicide or murder beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. I mean, I haven't heard anyone be able to do that. I've asked on this show as well, some people, and they talk in vague terms. But when you're the prosecutor, you cannot recommend charges unless you believe you can prove a case beyond any and all reasonable doubt. That's your ethical obligation. To do anything else would be unethical, and you should not be a prosecutor. So I'm waiting to hear whether it's from one of these musical artists or someone else. Lay it out. Tell me how you prove the elements of murder in this case.
I think that's a really good point. And look, the three of us are broadcasting on a channel called Court TV, and we're pretty thorough. I mean, we go through these cases from top to bottom. We look at the evidence. We watch the videos. I've watched more body cam video in the last, couple of years than I care to ever remember. But it's important. It gives context. It's what the prosecutors do because they're going to have to present cases. And I agree. As I watch that, I have mixed emotions. I'm desperate for Black America to get a fair shake. I am desperate for our culture to get better. But I am not desperate to, cherry pick cases because it's politically or for activists it's convenient or it fits a narrative. I'm nervous about that. I'm very nervous about Megan Thee Stallion's voice and how much research she's done on the case. And I think she should use her voice if she does her homework. And maybe she has. And I'm certainly not, brushing her with a broad stroke here. But I just don't know how many people have, because as we've looked at this case, it would be really, really hard to prove, according to law, this particular case when it comes to those first two officers in the door. And this shouldn't be a fad, right? You shouldn't jump on a bandwagon because it's a fad. You should jump on a bandwagon when you truly believe that the facts support your argument. And I think we're in a culture that lacks a lot of fact right now.
Yeah, and I'll do it again tonight. We're going to talk about this in the 10 o'clock hour. I've got great attorneys coming on. I'm going to ask them, can you lay out, if they believe it, can they lay out how you prove the elements? And maybe they'll let me know tonight. I haven't had anyone be able to do it yet.
And by the way, Vinny, there are plenty of cases where you can prove the fact, and it is abhorrent what's happened to the victims in the case. And I say, go for it and fly your flag and put a banner across your front door, but when it's politically or, convenient, it's not helpful. It's not helpful for a cause because it's divisive. Right?
Yeah, and you've got a different standard in the criminal world than you do in the civil world. Civil world, they have a great case. And they got a settlement. So half of our system of justice dealt with this. It's the other half that's much more difficult too. Julia, let me ask you about the one officer who was charged, Brett Hankison. Motion hearing today, all involving a witness. What else is going on in that one?
Right, he's the one who was charged with wanton endangerment, and that is related, it's 3 counts related to neighbors of Breonna Taylor. It's something I've seen in a meme, actually, that it really has stood out and shows a sentiment of public opinion, where they say the walls, and they apologize to Breonna Taylor, saying those walls got more justice than she did, and that's related to this case, the indictment that did come out of it. And that grand jury, they were able to hear the 911 call of that neighbor who called twice that night that those shots were first fired into not only Breonna Taylor's apartment, but this woman's apartment as well.
911 operator Sparks, where is your emergency? Someone apartment number. What's going on right now?
Well, something's going on next door, and there's bullet holes all the way through the wall, through our blinds, and my boyfriend tried to open the door, and they're out there, the cops are out there yelling to get back in the house.
Yes, you need to you all need to stay inside your apartment.
Okay, our glass door is shattered, and I understand there's something going on, but I have a factor over here, so something needs to be explained to me.
Okay, we have an officer involved situation that is going on, so you need to just stay inside your apartment.
Okay, well, is somebody going to come here? What's all said and done? Because our glass door is shattered. I know you know what's going on.
Okay, what is your name?
I'm Chelsea.
Chelsea, I'm going to run it for you, and as soon as we can, we'll get somebody out there, okay? They're going to check on you all. Anybody hurt?
No.
Okay,
not here.
Okay, I'm going to let them know, okay?
Okay, thank you.
In those 3 counts, there were 3 people inside of that apartment. She was a pregnant woman. She was there with her partner and her 5-year-old son. Today in the motions hearing, there was another witness, one of the neighbors who retained an attorney, asking for the addresses to make sure that those aren't part of the discovery in this case. And you heard those long beeps in the audio recording. That's because a lot of that has been redacted to protect those people who are involved in this.
Absolutely, and I understand that, and I agree with it. You don't keep the addresses out. I mean, these people have been through enough here, and they're just witnesses. Unbelievable.